"Can I buy that dog, Daddy?" she asked softly. John barely heard his daughter over the rain ticking on the metal roof of the roadside adoption tent. The little girl's hand, warm and trembling, pointed at a black and tan shepherd curled in the back of a wire crate. The dog's eyes were not the soft, pleading kind you expect at adoption events. They were razors behind amber glass, locked on the highway like he was waiting for something to break. Across the lot, a police cruiser idled. Its windshield wipers snapped back and forth, carving white, nervous arcs through the drizzle. An officer stepped out, tugging his jacket tight against the wind. When his gaze fell on the dog, he froze. The shepherd's ears twitched. A low, controlled exhale fogged the crate door. "Daddy," the girl whispered again, tugging at John's sleeve. "Please?" The officer took one step, then another. His boots made tiny prints in the wet dust. John watched him approach. The cop's face had gone pale and something like grief was moving behind his eyes. He stopped beside them, hands bare and open, the way you do when you're approaching a frightened animal or a living memory you're scared to touch. "What's his name?" the officer asked, voice sandpapered thin. The volunteer with the clipboard, Grace, according to the blue sticker on her sweater, shifted her weight. "We don't know," she said. "He came in without tags. We call him Max." At that name, the officer's hands clenched, then opened again. The dog's head lifted, slow and certain, like a heavy door being pushed against old hinges. The eyes changed, not softening exactly, but clearing the way a lake clears after the wind calms. "Max," the officer said. Not a question. A test. The dog stood. Even half-starved, he moved like a coiled spring, controlled and precise. He padded to the gate and sat without being asked, head high, attention pinned to the man in the rain. Grace looked from the dog to the cop. "Do you know him?" The officer swallowed. "Daniel Reed," he said, as if offering a name would keep him from drowning. "Kane," he stopped, breathed. "I had a partner named Max, had, past tense." The word landed like a stone. The little girl's eyes, Emma's eyes, John remembered to remind himself, went wide. "A police dog?" She pressed closer to the crate, then caught herself, sensing the dog's thin patience and the adult gravity of the moment. "Is he yours, sir?" Officer Reed crouched, the rain stitching a dark pattern across his shoulders. He extended one hand toward the wire. "Max," he said again, softer. "Heel." The dog slid back a precise half-step and parked in the position of attention. Even the volunteer drew in a breath. This wasn't just a well-trained pet. This was a soldier hearing the drum of an old war. 2 years, Reed whispered, eyes shining in the gray light. "It's been 2 years. Emma looked up at John with the kind of hope that made a father weak. "Daddy, if he doesn't have a home—" John didn't answer. He was watching Officer Reed, whose jaw was tightening as if holding in a shout. Grace kneaded the corner of her clipboard. "He came in from a roadside pickup," she said. "A guy named Mike brought him. Said he'd been wandering near the rail yards at night. We scanned him. No chip." "No chip," Reed repeated flatly, like a verdict. He stood and turned toward the rain-flecked highway. A siren wailed far off, a rising, falling ghost. The dog's body tensed, but not from fear, from remembering. "Where's Mike now?" Reed asked. Grace's eyes flicked toward the back of the lot. Inside, signing some forms. "He said he'd be back later with another dog." Another dog. John didn't like the sound of that. He glanced at Max, at the corded muscles visible beneath the dull coat, at the healed half-moon scar along the front left paw, a scar that looked like it had once held metal. His mind ticked through the headlines he'd half-read. Midwestern storm, flash flood, officers swept off the bridge, 1 man rescued, 1 dog missing in the river. There had been a photo, he remembered, grainy and mournful, of a soaked officer with a leash in his hand and a look that could stop a clock. Officer Reed was staring at that same scar now, and whatever he'd built inside himself to survive the last 2 years was cracking. He dropped to one knee. The dog stepped forward, pressed his muzzle to Reed's palm, huffed once and, "God help John," wagged, just once, like a salute. Emma made a soft sound, part gasp and part laugh, and the dog's ears flicked toward her, curious. She was clutching the last of her birthday money in a little paper envelope, as if it were the key to a kingdom only she could see. "Can I buy that dog, Daddy?" she asked, as if the decision were simple, as if you could love a living wound and call it yours. Grace folded her arms around her clipboard. "There's a process," she began carefully. "A home check, a week's trial," and the sound of a van engine cut through her words. The adoption lot had a slow rhythm of cars pulling in and out, but this engine was different, rough, impatient. A white panel van rolled into the far end of the lot and parked at an angle, blocking half the exit. The driver idled with the door open, cigarette smoke unraveling into the wet air. Officer Reed rose with predator calm. "Grace," he said without moving his gaze. "That Mike, what's his last name?" "Keller," she said, uncertainty creeping in. "He volunteers sometimes, says he fosters strays." Reed's hand went to his radio. He didn't press it yet. "Stay with the dog," he told John without looking away from the van. "Both of you." The driver flicked his cigarette onto the wet ground and crushed it slowly under his boot. He was middle-aged with a hard face and a jacket too heavy for spring. He scanned the crates with quick, measuring eyes. When his gaze landed on Max, it lingered. Not affection, appraisal. Then he looked at Reed and started to smile. The rain felt colder suddenly. John slid an arm around Emma and drew her back from the crate. "Max, watch the van the way you watch a door when you know the man behind it doesn't knock." "I'll get Mike," Grace said. But Officer Reed stopped her with a small shake of his head. "No," he said. "We'll all stay right here." For a sliver of a second, the world held its breath. The van's sliding door groaned open, and the driver hauled out a second crate. Inside, a trembling golden dog with ribs like piano keys huddled in straw. The driver set the crate down hard enough to jolt a whimper out of the animal. "That yours?" Reed called evenly. The man's smile widened, and he touched the brim of an imaginary cap. "Morning, officer. Just dropping off a stray I found." "Doing my civic duty." Reed took a step forward. "Your name?" "Mike Keller." "We met." Grace's mouth opened. She seemed to shrink behind her clipboard. "Mike, I didn't know you were bringing—" "Found him last night," Mike said smoothly. "This one's got good bones, too. People like the pretty ones. Helps the rescue with their, costs." He winked at Grace. "Right?" Max gave a low, rolling growl that thrummed against the crate's floor. The hair along his spine lifted ever so slightly. Emma tightened her grip on John's sleeve hard enough to make his fingers numb. Officer Reed's radio crackled, a distant voice calling his unit number. He raised it toward his mouth, but before he could speak, the man moved. Not toward Reed, toward the back of the van, toward the storage area. The door was still open, rain pinging on the metal, and inside, John saw a flash of something that made his stomach drop. Collars. Dozens of them, cut open at the buckles, piled like a trophy heap. "Stay here," Reed said, but Max had already acted. In one fluid, impossible movement, he braced his shoulder against the crate door, testing the latch. John didn't know what he was watching until he noticed the bent bit of wire near the hinge, the kind of thing a smart dog could work loose if he'd had time to study it. The door popped outward a fraction of an inch, then another. Max pressed, silent and deliberate, and the latch sprang. He didn't lunge. He stepped out and planted himself between Emma and the van. "Max," Reed said, voice taut as wire. The dog flicked an ear. The message was clear. "I will hold this line until you tell me otherwise." Mike Keller straightened from the van door. His eyes snapped to the open space where Max's crate had been. For the first time, something ugly showed through the smarm, a gleam of calculation turning to alarm. He reached for the van door like a man deciding between fight and run. "Don't," Reed said, drawing himself to full height. "Hands where I can see them," Mike laughed, a brittle sound. "You got a warrant to search my van?" Emma's breath hitched. John could feel the small, wild heart hammering under her jacket where she pressed against him, but he realized with a jolt that it wasn't fear alone. It was a child's surety that the dog in front of her was a hero. "And heroes don't let bad guys win, sir," John said, voice low to Emma. "Don't move." Max's body leaned forward a degree, muscles arranged like a phrase in a language only he and his handler spoke. Reed saw it and made a decision in the space of a heartbeat. "Max," he said quietly. "Watch!" The dog flowed to the van's corner, eyes locked on Mike. The move cut off the driver's access to the rear of the vehicle without bringing the dog within kicking distance. It was a simple tactic with 1,000 hours of training behind it, and it told Mike what he needed to know about who and what stood in front of him. Okay, Mike said, hands lifting. Everybody relax. Behind him, the pile of cut collars loomed in the shadows. Reed's eyes flicked past Mike to the passenger seat. A ring of keys lay there, attached to a leather tab stamped with a number, 314. Storage unit? Reed's mind moved like a chess player's. Evidence, trafficking, dogs taken, chips removed, resold to rescues for a fee. The kind of grey economy that runs on suffering and looks clean at the front desk. The rain hardened, drumming on metal and skin. A woman with an umbrella paused at the edge of the lot to see what was happening. Somewhere a horn honked, short and impatient. Grace, Reed said. Call it in. Tell them we have a possible animal trafficking case, a van full of collars, and a missing canine located alive. Grace fumbled her phone out, hands shaking. Mike seemed to do a quick calculation of the distance to the driver's seat, the dog's posture, the officer's hand near his belt. His jaw set. You're making a mistake, he moved. Reed moved faster. He stepped into Mike's path, blocking his lunge for the door. Mike shoved. Reed took the hit with a grunt but kept his footing. The world blurred. Wet air. Rubber mats slick with rain. The staccato of shoes on puddles. Emma cried out, Max! Max didn't bark. He launched. Not for Mike's throat. He wasn't that kind of dog. Straight for the forearm that had shoved Reed, clamping down with calibrated force. He held a living handcuff, turning Mike's push into a bent, shocked stumble. Reed pivoted, grabbed Mike's free wrist, and drove him against the van's side with a slam that rattled the metal. On the ground, Reed snarled. Now, Mike cursed, twisted. Max adjusted his hold without tearing, a genius of restraint. Pain and control replaced violence with inevitability. By the time Grace's voice found its shape on the phone, the sirens were already rising, closer now, a chorus answering the single thread of Reed's courage. Other officers arrived. Words were exchanged. Mike was cuffed and read his rights, his face a blown fuse. The van doors were opened. Photos were taken. Numbers were called. It turned out the number on the keys did match a storage unit nearby, and inside they found more crates, more collars, and paperwork that led to buyers with fat wallets and soft words. Max stood in the rain, close enough to feel Emma's warmth at his shoulder. He looked at Reed and then at John and Emma, and in that gaze was an impossible question. Where do I belong now that the war is over? Reed knelt, face raw. He held out his hand, palm up. Max stepped forward and placed his paw on it, light and sure. Reed shut his eyes like a man touching a ghost and finding it solid. I thought I lost you, he said, voice breaking. Emma didn't move, didn't dare, but tears glossed her lashes. John felt something in his chest flex and ache, the strange, familiar pain of loving what you can't keep and keeping what you don't deserve. A week later, the sun fell warm through Emma's bedroom window, pooling on the rug in a square of honeyed light. Max lay there, fattening up, breathing slow and deep. The city had given Reed every bit of honor it could, a commendation for cracking the ring, a parade of hands and cameras, and then, at Reed's quiet request, they retired Max officially. He had done more than enough. At the hearing, Reed had stood before the small committee, Max pressed to his leg like a living boot. He found his way back, Reed said simply. But I think he was on his way somewhere else, too. He looked over his shoulder at Emma sitting with her legs swinging and her fists clenched white around the edge of a chair. Her grin was a small sunrise, nervous and bright. Grace was there, too, still shaken by how close she'd come to being fooled for longer than a kindness allows. John, dressed in the one decent blazer he owned, felt like he was doing something holy by just being honest. The committee agreed. Max would retire into Emma's home, with Reed as first emergency contact and frequent visitor. Shared custody, Grace joked afterward, wiping at her eyes. I'll bring the biscuits. Max seemed to understand something about the moment that went beyond the words. He leaned into Emma when she reached for him. He put his head under her hand and sighed like a man unbuttoning a tight collar. They brought him home that afternoon. Emma carried his new collar like it was a medal. John held the door and tried not to cry in front of his kid. Max trotted through the living room, sniffed the kitchen, then found the sun and folded himself into it with a groan of contentment that made John laugh out loud. The first night, Max woke twice, standing at the window when a siren passed, watching the red-blue wash chase itself across the walls. He didn't whine. He simply watched, then lay down again at the end of Emma's bed, put his chin on his paws, and went to sleep. 2 days later, Reed came by with a battered tennis ball and a stack of papers. Training records, he said, and a toy he always liked. Max stood, ears up, tail making a quiet thud-thud against the wall. Emma's face was pink with happiness and nerves, like she was meeting a movie star who had chosen her as his best friend. They went to the park. Reed threw the ball. Max forgot every injury and creak and flew, a black and tan comet skimming the grass. They stayed until the sky turned the color of spilled ink, and the streetlights blinked awake like a constellation of small, steadfast stars. Emma took Reed's hand without thinking as they crossed the street back to the car. Reed squeezed and let go. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing him home." Reed looked at Max, standing guard by John's open trunk, chest proud, eyes alert, the tennis ball bright in his mouth. "He brought me home too," he said. "I didn't know it until now." That night the rain returned, rustling the leaves and drumming soft rhythms on the roof. Emma slept with her hand curved over Max's ribs, feeling the rise and fall like listening to the sea. In the other room, John sat long in the dark with a cup of cooling coffee, the house breathing around him. He thought of how the world had found a way to circle back to itself. A lost dog, a grieving officer, a girl with a question that had sounded like a wish. He closed his eyes and saw the moment again. The officer's face, white as the rain, the dog stepping forward to press muzzle to palm. Emma's breath catching, the split second when everything hinged on trust and courage, and a latch bent just enough by an old smart paw. A week later, Reed showed up on a Saturday with a new harness. Not a police harness, though it had that sturdy seriousness about it. "Therapy program," he explained, scratching behind Max's ear. "Hospitals, schools. He's calm. He's gentle. He wants a job, even if it's a gentler one." Emma looked at John, then at Max. "Can we?" They did. On Tuesday mornings, Max wore the harness and visited the children's ward, where he learned the names of kids whose bravery could light a city. He would stand by bedsides and let little hands find the soft place behind his ears, would lean into wheelchairs like a living anchor. Reed and John took turns driving. Sometimes all three of them went, and Grace brought treats because she could not help herself. On the wall in Emma's room, she hung a photo, Max sitting tall between her and Reed, the tennis ball squeezed playfully between his teeth, a tiny tag on his collar glinting in the sun. It said simply Max, below it, in Emma's careful pencil, the words, "Found, not lost." If you'd asked a passerby in that parking lot on the day of the rain what he was witnessing, he might have said a cop stopping a con or a family taking home a dog. He wouldn't have been wrong, but he would have missed the way the world sometimes opens like a palm, offering back what was taken, with a little more than you had before. A partnership remade into a family, a job turned into a calling, a wound that learned to wag. Max slept that night with his paws twitching in dreams, maybe of floodwaters and sirens, maybe of tennis balls and sun-warmed rugs. Maybe of both. The past didn't disappear. It simply walked beside them, a ghost that had learned how to smile. And when Emma asked the question again, as children do when they want to hear the story one more time, "Daddy, can I buy that dog?" John kissed the top of her head and said, "We didn't buy him, honey. We found him, and he found us." The world is full of broken things that still know the way home. Sometimes all it takes is a soft question, a brave dog, and a man who remembers that love is another name for letting go and letting in. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.